There are moments in life that split time in two, the before and the after. For Maya Delgado, that moment came on a Thursday night in November, somewhere between exhaustion and autopathy, between a double shift at St. Catherine's General and the cold walk home she'd made 100 times before. Maya was 26, a registered nurse. The kind of person who remembered patients' names long after they'd been discharged, who brought homemade soup to elderly neighbors, who smiled at strangers even when her feet ached and her eyes burned from hours under fluorescent hospital lights. She wasn't naive. She'd seen enough of life in the ER to know the world wasn't kind. But she believed, in some quiet, stubborn corner of her heart, that it could be. That belief was about to be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. The rain started around midnight. Not the gentle kind, the aggressive, sideways kind that finds every gap in your jacket and soaks through anyway. Maya had her head down, hood up, walking fast. She wasn't paying attention to the alley on her left. She never walked down alleys. Every woman in this city knew better. But then she heard it. A sound, low, wet, barely there. Like someone trying to breathe through something they shouldn't be breathing through. She stopped. Every practical instinct told her to keep walking. Call 911 from a safe distance. Don't be the woman in the horror movie who investigates the noise. She turned and looked anyway. He was propped against the brick wall halfway down the alley, one leg stretched out, one arm braced against the ground. His suit jacket, black, clearly expensive, was soaked through. So was the shirt beneath it, though not entirely from rain. The dark stains spreading across his left side told a different story. His jaw was set hard, like a man who refused to show pain on principle. But his breathing was shallow, his face several shades too pale, and his eyes, dark, magnetic, startlingly alert, found hers immediately. "Don't scream," he said. His voice was low and controlled despite everything. "And don't run." Maya didn't scream. She didn't run. She walked toward him, dropped to her knees in the wet gravel without a second thought, and started assessing. Nurse mode, the part of her brain that went calm and clinical in crisis, switched on instantly. "How long ago?" she asked, already pulling off her scarf, pressing it against the wound. 20 minutes. Maybe 30. He watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read, like he was calculating something. "You need a hospital." "No hospital." She looked up at him sharply. "You're losing blood." "No." "Hospital." Each word deliberate. Final. She held his gaze for 2 seconds. Something in his eyes, not threat, exactly, but a weight, a certainty, told her this wasn't negotiation. She made a decision. "Fine. Then you need somewhere clean, warm, and close. Can you walk?" The ghost of something crossed his face. Almost amusement. "With help." She helped. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he'd done, or who had done this to him. She brought him to her apartment 6 blocks away, laid him on her kitchen table, and did what she'd been trained to do. Kept him alive. Cleaned the wound. Closed it. Monitored his breathing, his pulse, his color, through the long dark hours until morning. By the time pale light crept through her window curtains, the bleeding had stopped. His breathing had steadied. And Dominic Reyes, though she still didn't know that name, was watching her with an expression no one in his world had seen on his face in years. Something close to wonder. The name Dominic Reyes did not appear in newspapers. It did not appear in court records or police databases or anywhere the public might stumble across it. It existed in whispers, passed between men in back rooms, spoken quietly by prosecutors who'd tried and failed, known intimately by every organized crime figure from the Eastern Docks to the financial district's shadow economy. Dominic was 34 years old. He had built an empire the way architects build cathedrals, with patience, precision, and absolute intolerance for imperfection. His organization controlled import routes, construction contracts, 3 private security firms, and more city council members than anyone would be comfortable knowing. He had never been arrested. He told himself it was obligation. A debt acknowledged and repaid. That was how his world operated. You did not leave debts open. It created imbalance, and imbalance was dangerous. So when he sent flowers to her apartment 3 days later, it was bookkeeping. That was all. The flowers were peonies, Her favorite, though he didn't know that yet. He'd had someone find out what she liked. That, too, was simply thoroughness. When she texted the number on the card, "They're beautiful. Thank you. Hope you're resting," and he found himself reading it 4 times. That was nothing. A quirk. Tiredness. When he arranged for her hospital's parking lot to be repaved, without announcement or credit, 2 weeks later, that was repayment for the trouble he'd caused. Practical. When he showed up at the coffee shop across from St. Catherine's on a Tuesday morning, sitting in the corner booth with an espresso and a newspaper, it was because he had a meeting nearby. Maya walked in, saw him, and stopped mid-step. Then she walked directly to his booth and slid in across from him. "Dominic." "Maya. There's no meeting nearby, is there?" A pause. "No." She looked at him for a moment, then flagged down the server and ordered a latte. "Okay," she said simply. That was the beginning. Not dramatic, no grand confession, no dramatic gesture yet. Just 2 people sitting across from each other in an ordinary coffee shop, discovering that conversation came extraordinarily easy. He asked about her work, and she told him, without sanitizing it, without the careful social performance most people applied when talking to someone like him. Not that most people knew someone like him. She talked about the 11-year-old who'd come in with an asthma attack and left 2 days later drawing pictures for the nurses. About the ethical weight of triage decisions. About why she'd become a nurse rather than a doctor. Not for lack of ability, but because she wanted to stay with patients, not cycle through them. He listened in a way he rarely listened to anyone. Completely. In turn, she asked him questions, careful ones, not about his work, but about him. Where he'd grown up. What he'd wanted to be as a child. Whether he had people he trusted. The questions were so direct and so human that several of them landed with a small, quiet impact somewhere behind his sternum. He answered more than he meant to. On the way out, he held the door for her. She laughed at something he said, genuine, unguarded, and the sound of it did something unruly to his composure. In the car afterward, his second-in-command, Luca, glanced at him in the rear-view mirror. "The nurse?" "Drive," said Dominic. But Luca had worked for him for 8 years and knew the set of his jaw, and he understood, with a mixture of amusement and significant concern, that they were entering new territory. Dominic began finding reasons to be in her orbit. He was methodical about it, not in a way that crowded her, not in a way that imposed. He understood instinctively that Maya was not a woman you could push. She had a self-possession, a groundedness, that would simply not bend to pressure. So instead he offered. He appeared. He was present, consistently, in ways that were thoughtful rather than overwhelming. He sent her groceries when she mentioned being too tired to shop. He arranged, without telling her, for her student loan company to encounter a series of administrative complications that resulted in her balance being cleared. He had the heating system in her building replaced after she mentioned it was unreliable. Always quietly. Always without signature. She suspected him, of course. She was not naive. But she hadn't yet decided what to do about it. Maya had never been spoiled. Not in the way people mean when they use that word. Not with material excess. Not with someone making life consistently, deliberately easier. She'd grown up watching her mother work 2 jobs. She'd put herself through nursing school on scholarships and loans and sheer persistence. She'd learned to find satisfaction in small things because small things were what she had. Dominic changed that. Slowly, then all at once. It started subtly. A car, not a driver, just a car, available when she needed it, no obligation, appeared after she mentioned taking 3 buses to her mother's house across the city. She used it once, reluctantly, then again. The driver, a quiet man named Eli, became a fixture, professional, respectful, never intrusive. Then there was the incident with her hospital administrator. There had been a billing dispute over a patient Maya advocated for, an elderly man with no family, caught in an insurance gap. She'd been fighting the bureaucracy for weeks. One morning she arrived to find the dispute resolved, the patient's bill cleared, and a new hospital policy quietly drafted that closed the gap for future cases. No one could explain how. She confronted Dominic about it over dinner. Their 4th dinner, at a small Italian restaurant he'd chosen specifically because it was the kind of place she'd actually be comfortable in. not somewhere designed to impress. "You need to stop," she said, setting her fork down. But she didn't look angry. She looked conflicted, which was different. "Stop what?" He was entirely composed. "Dominic." "Maya." She stared at him. He held her gaze with calm attention. "Why are you doing this?" she asked genuinely. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because I can," he said first, which was true but incomplete. Then, "Because you should have things that are easier. Because you give a great deal and ask for almost nothing, and I find that," he paused, searching for the right word, "difficult to leave unaddressed. I'm not a project."
"No.
"You're not." He said it simply. "Absolutely. You're the only person in a very long time who has looked at me as though I'm just a person. I'm aware that's worth more than anything I've sent you." The table was quiet for a moment.
"The loan," she said.
"That was you." He didn't deny it. She exhaled, looked at the table, looked back at him. "That's a lot." "Yes. I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it," he said. "It was given without conditions." What undid her, not entirely but partially, in the way that matters, was that he meant it. She'd braced for the strings, for the expectation, for the transaction. It didn't come. He gave as though giving were its own sufficient conclusion. The gifts escalated with time, as he understood more about what she loved. Not jewelry first. She wasn't particularly interested in jewelry. Books, first editions of titles she'd mentioned once in passing. A weekend in a cottage by the sea, with Eli to drive her and absolutely no Dominic, just because she'd said she hadn't had a real break in 2 years. New equipment for the pediatric ward, donated anonymously through a foundation. A conversation once with the hospital's chief of medicine that resulted in Maya being fast-tracked for a mentorship program she'd applied to twice and been passed over for. He learned what she valued, and he moved the world, quietly, in those directions. And somewhere in all of it, in the dinners and the coffee mornings and the late phone calls that stretched past midnight, Maya found herself understanding something she hadn't expected to. She was falling. And the terrifying thing wasn't who he was. The terrifying thing was how safe she felt anyway. The world Dominic inhabited was not designed for someone like Maya. It was a world of angles and leverage, of agreements spoken in euphemism and debts collected in methods she would not want to know. The men around him had hard eyes and careful faces. The women he'd known before were either from his world, and therefore fortified, or from outside it, and eventually broken by the weight of knowing. He was aware, with a clarity he found inconvenient, that Maya was neither type. She was something else, and that something else was precisely what made this both extraordinary and complicated. His concern about her safety was immediate and concrete. Within a week of their first coffee, 2 of the 3 men who'd been responsible for the alley attack had been permanently resolved. The third had provided information and been released, elsewhere with nothing. Dominic's world had been made to understand that the woman was not to be touched, not to be used, not to be so much as noticed. The message was delivered once, quietly, and was absolute. But physical safety was the simpler problem. The harder question was this: how do you bring someone like Maya into your life without asking her to become someone else? Without letting your world corrode what made her her? He thought about this seriously, in the way he thought about serious problems, from every angle, thoroughly, without sentimentality. He decided, in the end, that the answer was honesty. Not complete operational transparency, that would endanger her, and he would not do that. But honesty about who he was, what he'd done, and what being near him meant. She deserved to choose with full information. He would not manage her reality for her. She wasn't someone you could do that to, anyway. He told her one night, sitting on the small balcony of her apartment, both of them with tea going cold, stars barely visible through the city haze. He told her not everything, but enough. Enough that it was real. Enough that it was honest. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I know," she said, finally. He looked at her. "I'm a nurse. I see everything. I've known for a while." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I just needed to know if you were going to tell me yourself." the test he hadn't known he was taking. He felt something in his chest that he didn't have a precise word for. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She considered it honestly. "Of you, no. Of what loving you might cost, yes." There it was, out in the air between them. Loving you. Neither of them moved for a moment. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he said. "Everything I have goes to that. But I won't lie to you and tell you there's no risk." "There is." "I know." She looked at him. "But you let me choose. That matters more than you think." What happened in the months that followed was this. A man who had built his life on control learned, in pieces, to be something more than that. Maya didn't reform him. She wasn't interested in reform as a project, and he wasn't a project any more than she was. But her presence in his life introduced something, a dimension, a counterweight, a reason. He became more careful, not less, more thoughtful about the work he did and the lines he held. Not because she demanded it, but because being seen clearly by someone who valued something in him made certain things harder to dismiss. And Maya navigated his world with the same quiet self-possession she brought to everything else. She didn't pretend the shadows weren't there. But she also didn't let them define the space she occupied. She brought warmth into rooms that hadn't had it. She made Luca bring her a copy of his mother's lasagna recipe, which she made and left in the office kitchen, and which resulted in 3 of Dominic's most stoic associates standing around a kitchen counter at 11 p.m. being profoundly affected by pasta. She was, in every room, exactly and entirely herself. And that, in the end, was the thing that kept her safe. Not just Dominic's protection, formidable as it was, but the simple, unassailable fact that she was the same person in every light. There was nothing to corrupt because there was nothing performed. Dominic, watching her across his boardroom one afternoon, she'd come to bring him lunch, which she did sometimes now, with a breezy casualness that had permanently destabilized his senior staff, thought, "This is the thing I didn't know I needed." Not a person who matched his world. A person who existed outside it, tethered to him, reminding him by her mere presence that there was an outside. He loved her.
He would have moved mountains.
He already had. And for the first time in a very long time, Dominic Reyes was not afraid of anything, except, in a very specific way, the thought of her ever being ordinary to him. He intended to spend considerable effort making sure that never happened.